so good.
That means the wedding's on again, and doesn't the bride look beautiful?
The bride looks beautiful? Her?
All brides are beautiful.
You mean she'll look worse after we're married?
Oh, wait till you...
You think Gilligan's Island is just a silly sitcom about 7 people stranded on an island? Behind those laughs are completely different stories. Actors who once wanted to leave the show, quiet conflicts behind the cameras, casting decisions that nearly changed the entire show, and even details the producers never thought viewers would notice. Some facts even make familiar scenes feel completely different when you watch them again. Today, we will explore the 20 strangest secrets of Gilligan's Island. And the closer we get to the end, the harder everything becomes to believe. Before we begin, hit like, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you do not miss the next interesting stories. Now let's begin the countdown with Number 1. Where exactly is Gilligan's Island located? For 3 years, the island's location was about as reliable as Gilligan's rescue plans. Completely inconsistent and sometimes pretty confusing. In some episodes, the coordinates placed them somewhere near Hawaii. Other episodes moved the island closer to Mexico. There were even numbers that did not match any real location in the Pacific Ocean, leaving fans who tried to find it on a map with nothing but one giant question mark. Sherwood Schwartz later openly admitted, "We never bothered with the map." In other words, geographic continuity clearly was not a top priority for the writers.
The ship's aground on the shore of this. The ship's aground on the shore of this uncharted desert isle.
Things became even more confusing when even the opening sequence used several different locations, making the island seem as if it had the ability to move on its own. The early footage used Sandy Key in the Caribbean for images of the island, followed by Coconut Island near Oahu. Meanwhile, many of the lagoon scenes were actually filmed at CBS Studio Center in California. Even the weather and tides changed noticeably between episodes, as if the island could move around the Pacific Ocean, depending on the needs of the story. The truth was much simpler. Gilligan's Island was a patchwork of multiple locations, studio sets and stock footage that the production team could use within its budget. So, Gilligan's biggest mystery may not be why they could not be rescued, but where the hell were they actually staying for those 3 years? Number 2. The Coast Guard's Coconut Crisis. For 3 years, American audiences watched 7 people stranded on a tropical island, missing every chance to be rescued again and again. We laughed at Gilligan's mistakes, marveled at how the professor could build a radio out of coconuts, and could only shake our heads at Mr. Howells' stubbornness when he absolutely refused to give up his familiar comforts. For most viewers, it was simply a silly and harmless comedy. But for some people, there was nothing funny about the situation these characters were in. During the original run of Gilligan's Island, the United States Coast Guard suddenly found itself in an extremely strange situation. They began receiving calls and letters from concerned citizens who genuinely believed that the story in Gilligan's Island was real. That 7 Americans were stranded somewhere in the middle of the Pacific Ocean, slowly starving to death while the government did nothing to save them.
Now just stop talking and please go to sleep.
Okay, Skipper. A new skateboard, a new beanie, 5 pounds of licorice.
5 pounds of licorice. With all that money, why don't you start thinking big?
You're right. 10 pounds of licorice.
Creator Sherwood Schwartz recalled that only about 10 weeks after the show premiered, a Coast Guard commander showed up at the CBS studio with an entire stack of telegrams from angry viewers. They wanted to know why the military still had not organized a rescue mission for those poor Americans. Those messages were filled with anger and patriotism. One telegram read, "We spend millions of dollars on foreign aid. Why not send an American destroyer to rescue those poor people before they starve to death?" But what confused Schwartz the most was not just that some people believed the show was real. What was even harder to understand was that they still believed it, even though the audience laughter could be heard after almost every joke. He once wondered, so who did they think was laughing at what was happening to these people? In other words, some viewers seemed to believe that somewhere there was a group of people sitting and laughing with delight at the sight of real people suffering on a deserted island. It sounds hard to believe today, but this story reflects quite clearly a particular period of early television when for some viewers the line between reality and entertainment was still very blurry. This was decades before reality television made us accustomed to questioning what appeared on the screen. Back then, if something was shown on television, some people simply assumed that it might be real. And if there were Americans in danger, then of course someone had to step in and save them. Ironically, the castaways were finally actually rescued in the 1978 television movie Rescue from Gilligan's Island.
After 15 years, we're finally rescued.
Rescued. Rescued.
Rescued.
Rescued.
But for one brief and strange moment in television history, the biggest rescue mission did not take place on the screen. It took place in the hearts and minds of viewers who cared about the 7 castaways so much that they could no longer clearly distinguish between actors performing in a comedy and real people actually waiting to be rescued. Number 3. The SS Minnow was a jab at the FCC. That little boat was not simply unlucky, it was also a cleverly hidden piece of satire. The SS Minnow was named after Newton Minow, the FCC chairman who became famous in 1961 for calling American television a vast wasteland in a speech to the National Association of Broadcasters. In other words, Minow basically stood in front of the entire television industry and told them that much of what they were producing was intellectual garbage. You can imagine how that comment was received in a room full of network executives. Sherwood Schwartz, in particular, did not forget it. And like many other creative people, he seemed to know how to remember an insult for a very long time, especially when that insult was so public.
Is a vast wasteland.
In an interview with the Television Academy Foundation, Schwartz admitted that naming the boat after Minow was a subtle form of retaliation. Instead of responding directly, he turned Minow into a small, ordinary boat whose fate was to run aground right in the show's opening. But this is where the story starts to become a little more unclear. A rumor has existed for years that SS did not simply stand for steamship, but was actually the initials of Sherwood Schwartz. And frankly, that detail sounds completely plausible for someone who deliberately named his doomed boat after an official who had criticized the entire television industry. There is only one problem. Schwartz never confirmed it. Sometimes the best television stories are the ones that sound so plausible that we want to believe them, even though they cannot be proven for certain. The most interesting part is that Newton Minow apparently was not bothered at all. He reportedly found the whole joke quite funny and later remained on good terms with Schwartz. So this act of retaliation did not ultimately turn into a major feud. It simply turned the name of an FCC chairman into the most famous doom boat in television. And sometimes the best kind of revenge is simply making that name remain stranded forever in pop culture history. Number 4. The happy wife who got the castaways canceled. Gilligan's Island did not disappear because audiences turned away. The show was sacrificed to save an older program, almost like throwing the young guy overboard to keep the old ship running. In 1967, after 3 seasons, CBS canceled Gilligan's Island to move Gunsmoke into its time slot. One famous reason was that Babe Paley, the wife of CBS chairman William Paley, loved Gunsmoke and asked her husband to save the show from cancellation. Even in the 1960s, the saying, "happy wife, happy life," seemed capable of influencing a primetime schedule. At the time, Gilligan's Island had fallen to 44th place out of 101 programs.
And this dunch is almost all pun. I mean, this punch is almost all done. It's perfect. It's all gone, but believe me, it was perfect.
Good work, Gilligan. You're punch drunk.
Not an outstanding performance, but under normal circumstances, still enough to give the show a chance to continue. So the cast and crew were completely surprised. Many had bought homes in Los Angeles or made long-term commitments because they believed the next season was almost guaranteed. However, the decision did not come only from Babe Paley. Bringing Gunsmoke back after the cast had already been told the show was canceled meant higher costs. Meanwhile, some CBS executives reportedly had never really liked the broad comedy style of Gilligan's Island. When a time slot needed to be freed up, it became an easy target. In the end, the prestigious Western defeated the sitcom about 7 castaways.
You don't need a mirror. You're still beautiful.
Oh, I know, but I'd like to get another opinion.
Ironically, Gilligan's Island went on to have an incredible cultural life after it was canceled. Decades of reruns helped the show become even more famous than it had been during its original run. So Gilligan did not lose the chance to be rescued because audiences stopped caring. CBS simply decided that one cowboy needed saving more than 7 castaways with a little help from the boss's wife. Number 5. Fan theory, the 7 deadly sins. Let the fans turn a comedy about coconuts and castaways into an entire theological thesis. Gilligan's Island became the center of one of the most famous television theories. The 7 people on the island actually represent the 7 deadly sins. According to this interpretation, ginger is lust. That probably does not need much explanation. Mr. Howell is greed, also fairly obvious. Gilligan represents sloth, although this is somewhat debatable because he never seems to stop running around the island. The skipper is wrath, thanks to his legendary outbursts. The professor represents pride with his superior intelligence and ability to turn almost anything into technology made from coconuts. Marianne is envy, supposedly because she desires Ginger's glamour, and Mrs. Howell represents gluttony, a choice that seems a little unfair, but let us accept it for now. Sounds convincing enough to become a college thesis, right?
One of those cramped quarters, like a little ham radio shack.
Hello, I'm an actress. Can you tell me what's happening in Hollywood? Any gossip?
At first, creator Sherwood Schwartz laughed at the entire theory and called it ridiculous. Quite interesting coming from the very person who gave us radios made from coconuts. However, Schwartz admitted that each character really was built around one exaggerated personality trait. That detail alone was enough for fans to keep the theory alive for many years. But this is where it gets interesting. Later, Schwartz seemed to soften his position. By 2008, he was reportedly willing to admit that each character really did have a sinful flaw that came from the 7 deadly sins. Maybe he truly changed his mind, or after decades of hearing fans analyze it, he was simply too tired to keep arguing. And of course, scholars joined in as well. Paul Cantor once viewed the castaways as a parody of American democracy. 7 types of people from different social classes and social archetypes, forced to cooperate in order to survive even though they often came into conflict with one another. Frankly, this interpretation makes even more sense than the 7 deadly sins theory. Others connected the characters to the archetypes of commedia dell'arte, arguing that beneath the appearance of a silly sitcom were theatrical foundations that were much older. Because apparently a show about 7 people stranded on an island was still not complicated enough. In the end, we even had to bring theology, American democracy, and Italian Renaissance theater into it. Number 6, the Calypso version of Gilligan's Island that you were never meant to hear.
In tropical sea is a tropic port. Vacation fun is the favorite.
You know the theme song from Gilligan's Island, right? You can probably hear the line, "Just sit right back and you'll hear a tale," and continue singing it from memory. But before that folk song about the sea became a television legend, the show once had a completely different theme song. It was a lively calypso tune, written by a young composer who would later create the music for some of the most famous movies in history.
This is the place where the tourists flock, renting the boats at the busy dock.
The original pilot episode of Gilligan's Island, which remained almost hidden for 30 years, still had the familiar premise and a few familiar faces. But many things were very different, especially the opening music. Instead of the Wellingtons singing the classic folk ballad, audiences heard a cheerful calypso tune that sounded more like music from a Caribbean resort than a 3-hour tour that was about to turn into a disaster.
2 secretaries from USA sail on the Minnow this lovely day.
The man who wrote that music was Johnny Williams. The name John Williams used during the early years of his career, long before he became the musical master behind Star Wars and Indiana Jones. But the strangest part was still to come. The singer was not even a professional singer. Creator Sherwood Schwartz himself performed the song by imitating the style of famous calypso singer Sir Lancelot. In other words, the creator of the show was practically singing a karaoke version of his own theme song. And even the content of the song was different. There was no movie star, no professor, and no Marianne. Instead, there were 2 unnamed female secretaries and a high school teacher. With the amount of luggage they brought, one could even wonder whether 6 hours would have been enough for a trip advertised as lasting only 3 hours. The pilot episode was filmed at Alawai Yacht Harbor in Honolulu on November 26, 1963, just 4 days after the assassination of President John F. Kennedy. America was still in mourning at the time. If you look closely at the scene of the SS Minnow leaving the harbor, you can see an American flag flying at half-staff in the background. It was not part of the script, but it unintentionally turned the opening scene of a comedy into a deeply moving historical moment. When CBS rejected the pilot, Sherwood Schwartz had to redo many elements of the show. After that, he and composer George Weil created the storytelling sea song that millions of viewers eventually knew by heart. So the next time John Williams' music gives you goosebumps in Indiana Jones or Star Wars, remember that before the epic scores in the Oscars, one of his early career jobs was writing a calypso tune for Gilligan's Island.
And the millionaire, and Mrs. Millionaire, and the other tourists on Gilligan's Island.
Number 7. The Gilligan's Island twist no one saw coming. For 15 years, viewers kept wondering one thing. Would the castaways ever actually be rescued? Or would they spend the rest of their lives on the island, continuing to build coconut devices that never worked? In 1978, the answer finally came in the television movie Rescue from Gilligan's Island, with most of the original cast returning. Tina Louise did not participate, so Judith Baldwin was cast in her place as Ginger, a fairly awkward cast change for viewers who had become so familiar with the original face. But being rescued turned out not to be the end. It was only the beginning of an increasingly strange series of events.
However, that wave will be so strong that it could force a boat into the shipping lane so we can finally be rescued.
That's good.
Only we don't have a boat.
That's bad.
In the 1979 sequel, The Castaways on Gilligan's Island, the Howells decided to turn the very island that had trapped them into a tropical resort. Because nothing says great business idea more clearly than making money from the place that once stranded you for years. Naturally, things once again spun out of control. A plot involving the discovery of valuable minerals appeared, and the group quickly got into trouble as if they had never left the island. But even that was not the strangest part. In 1981 came the Harlem Globetrotters on Gilligan's Island. And yes, the title means exactly what you think it means. The Harlem Globetrotters basketball team arrived on the island and eventually had to face robot players. It was the kind of plot that sounded more like the fever dream of a television executive who had drunk too much coffee than a sequel to a classic sitcom. This time, neither Tina Louise nor Dawn Wells returned. Constance Forsland took over one of the main female roles amid a pay dispute. Jim Backus still appeared in some scenes even though his health had declined and he was dealing with Parkinson's disease, making his moments feel bittersweet for fans before he died in 1989. The combination of Gilligan's Island, the Harlem Globetrotters, and robot villains was almost early 1980s television at its strangest. Part nostalgia, part commercial calculation, and completely absurd, but somehow still memorable. For fans, it was like taking childhood memories, putting them in a blender with exhibition basketball and robots, and seeing what happened. The Castaways may never have truly escaped the sequels and reunions, but they proved one thing. If Gilligan could meet the Harlem Globetrotters and join them in facing robot basketball players, then on television, literally anything could happen. And sometimes the most ridiculous ideas become the things we remember the longest. If you have watched this far, let me know in the comments. Which fact about Gilligan's Island has surprised you the most so far? And do not go anywhere, because the strangest stories are still ahead. Now let's get back to the countdown with Number 8. Tina Louise hated playing Ginger. Or did she? On screen, Ginger Grant was glamorous, confident, and the embodiment of a Hollywood star stranded on a deserted island.
Maybe if we had a hat with a veil.
I'm sure she's considered quite attractive in her own little group.
What's the trouble? She is her own little group.
In real life, Tina Louise's relationship with the role was much more complicated. At first, she believed that Gilligan's Island had been presented as a vehicle to advance her career, with Ginger as the central character. But in the end, Louise realized that she was only part of an ensemble cast. What worried her even more was the risk of being typecast as a dumb blonde movie star. Louise was a formally trained actress and had done serious stage work. Meanwhile, the early scripts often had Ginger imitate Marilyn Monroe with a breathy voice. To Louise, it felt like a glittering prison made of palm leaves and false eyelashes.
Let me see. There must be something I could do.
About the well.
Her frustration led her to refuse to participate in the later reunion movies. As a result, Ginger was replaced first by Judith Baldwin and then by Constance Forsland. Louise also earned only about $1,500 per episode and received no rerun royalties, even as decades of reruns turned Gilligan's Island into a massive success. But the story is not as simple as Tina Louise hating Ginger. In later interviews, especially after Dawn Wells died in 2020, Louise said that the rumors that she completely hated the role were inaccurate. She actually enjoyed playing Ginger more once the writers began giving the character more depth and toned down the dumb blonde image. Even so, Louise's absence from reunions for decades certainly helped those rumors last longer. After Gilligan's Island, she continued to change her image through films such as The Stepford Wives, wrote children's books, and took part in literacy efforts along with many charitable programs in New York. Today, in her 90s and as the last surviving member of the original main cast, Tina Louise has had decades to look back on Ginger in a different way. Perhaps she never truly hated Ginger. What she did not want was to let a single role define her entire identity and career. Number 9. The secrets Mrs. Howell kept hidden from everyone. On Gilligan's Island, Mrs. Howell lived exactly like a high society lady, wealthy, elegant, and seemingly never needing to do anything herself. But Natalie Schafer in real life was even more interesting than her character. She kept two things especially private: her real age and her enormous fortune.
The first thing you use, my dear, is your driver.
My driver? Don't be silly, darling. You know perfectly well my chauffeur's back home.
The first thing that may surprise you, Schafer was 13 years older than Jim Backus, who played her husband, but she was extremely careful about keeping her real age private.
I am Thurston Howell III, and this, of course, is my wife, Mrs. Thurston Howell III.
According to Hollywood Stories, Schafer did not even reveal her exact age to her husband. She was also said to have made requests to limit shots that were too close or physical comedy that might make her age more obvious. That may sound extreme today, but Hollywood at the time was not easy on older actresses. Schafer understood that and knew how to protect her career. But her age was not the most interesting secret. In real life, Schafer was already a Beverly Hills millionaire thanks to extremely smart real estate investments. In fact, when she agreed to appear in the pilot episode of Gilligan's Island, she admitted that part of the reason was simply that the production would take her to Hawaii for free. For Schafer at the time, it was almost just a Hawaiian vacation that happened to come with an acting role.
Actually, I was showing some visiting royalty, a poverty pocket.
Mrs. Howell, sugar beets have to come out of the ground before you can put them in cans.
Ooh, what a perfectly ghastly idea.
She could not have known that the trip would eventually create the role that would be associated with her name for the rest of her life. Although she later felt uncomfortable at times about being typecast as Mrs. Howell, Schafer had another side that few viewers knew about. She quietly gave much of her fortune to charity. When she died in 1991, she left millions of dollars to various organizations, including $2 million to the Motion Picture and Television Fund, along with a large sum for a care facility for people in the entertainment industry. So, Natalie Schafer in real life was quite different from the pampered woman she played on screen. She was private about her age, extremely smart with money, and ultimately used that very fortune to help others. Perhaps Mrs. Howell's greatest secret was that the woman behind the character was even more interesting than the character itself. Number 10. Raquel Welch almost played Mary Ann, and Jerry Van Dyke almost played Gilligan. One casting choice can change television history almost as quickly as Gilligan can ruin a rescue plan, and Gilligan's Island almost looked completely different. Raquel Welch once auditioned for Mary Ann, but was rejected because the producers thought she was too glamorous to play a farm girl from Kansas. Sherwood Schwartz wanted a more natural girl next door image, and Dawn Wells perfectly captured that wholesome charm, making millions of viewers later choose between Team Mary Ann and Team Ginger.
Gee, that would make me happy. Being rescued? Imagine everybody being rescued. Oh, except for Gilligan!
But the strangest casting story belongs to Gilligan. The role was originally offered to Jerry Van Dyke, Dick Van Dyke's younger brother. After reading the script, he called it the worst thing I had ever read and decided to turn it down. Instead, Van Dyke chose to star in My Mother the Car, a sitcom about a man whose deceased mother is reincarnated as a talking car.
Hello, Davy.
Oh, Mother.
And that was not the smartest choice. My Mother the Car quickly failed, while Bob Denver put on Gilligan's red shirt and became part of television history. More ironically, Jerry Van Dyke later still had a successful career, especially with Coach, but he missed the chance to become the clumsy, lovable face of one of America's most enduring sitcoms. Sometimes a script considered terrible creates a classic show, and sometimes a talking car simply is not the better choice. Number 11. The millionaire who always forgot his wallet. Thurston Howell III was the kind of man who would rather die on a deserted island than live without a proper martini and a cashmere smoking jacket. He was the embodiment of luxury, a man who treated an unlimited expense account almost like a birthright. But Jim Backus, the actor who played him, had a completely different approach to money, and he turned that cheapness into a running joke with the entire cast. Backus was already a veteran actor at the time, famous for providing the voice of Mr. Magoo.
Oh, excuse me, young man. Could you direct me to C-33, Section 13? Oh, everyone has his hand out for a tip these days.
He often invited his co-stars out to lunch, told Dawn Wells and Natalie Schafer entertaining stories, and kept everyone amused. But whenever the bill arrived, Backus would suddenly forget his wallet. This was not a one-time incident. It happened over and over throughout the first season. His co-stars repeatedly had to pay, while Backus somehow managed to seem genuinely surprised every time by his chronic forgetfulness. At the end of season party, Natalie Schafer decided she had had enough. In her own style, she handed Backus a bill, listing all the lunches he had let other people pay for. The total came to about $300, a significant amount of money in the 1960s, equivalent to several $1,000s today. Backus reportedly burst out laughing when he received the bill, and the story immediately became a legendary anecdote among the cast. To this day, no one really knows whether it was genuine stinginess or a mischievous joke that went on a little too long.
Your own plantation.
Oh, cotton or sugar, Mr. Howell?
Both. Better throw in a fleet of cars. It's a long ride between crops.
Oh, Mr. Howell, you're wonderful. You're so generous and sweet.
But the irony could not have been more perfect. The man who played the show's millionaire was the very person who somehow never seemed to carry any cash. So the next time you see Mr. Howell asking Gilligan to serve a 5-star meal on the island, remember that the man who played him in real life did not mind getting a free lunch or two from his friends either. It turns out that even a Hollywood millionaire sometimes needs a co-star to pick up the bill. Number 12. Behind the Lagoon, cold, dirty, and completely fake.
Skipper, I got a bite. Must be a real big one, Skipper.
So do I. Mine must weigh 50 pounds. Watch it, little buddy. You're fouling my line.
Sorry to ruin your image of paradise, but the lush tropical lagoon in Gilligan's Island was completely a product of Hollywood. CBS built the tropical paradise right on the Studio City lot with imported palm trees and an artificial lagoon. The water was only about 4 feet deep, more like a giant swimming pool than the South Pacific. That may also explain why no one drowned, despite all the trouble Gilligan constantly caused. But the worst part was that the island was not warm at all.
Well, I'm sorry, but this is a deserted island. There's only 7 castaways out here, and I'm the skipper.
And I'm Gilligan.
What are you, some kind of Peace Corps dropouts? Come on, boys, move it, move it!
Most of the filming took place during the fall and winter. The water in the lagoon was not heated, often only around 40 to 50 degrees, or about 4 to 10 degrees. Bob Denver was reportedly forced to wear a wetsuit under Gilligan's iconic red shirt to fight the cold. Not exactly what you would imagine for a tropical paradise. The lagoon was also frequently clogged with algae and had to be cleaned every day so it would not look like a swamp on camera. During one production break, Bob Denver and Alan Hale Jr. were even said to have put a fish into the water to prove how bad the condition was. The fish died, and even if they could tolerate the cold and dirty water, the crew still had to deal with noise from the nearby freeway. Many shots were ruined by the sound of Los Angeles traffic passing through their South Pacific paradise. Eventually, some scenes were moved onto sound stages to avoid the weather and noise, but the lagoon continued to be used for exterior scenes throughout the series. Interestingly, the set remained long after Gilligan's Island ended. It was kept until 1995 before being demolished and turned into a parking lot. So the sun-drenched lagoon viewers saw on screen was actually cold, shallow, full of algae, and located right in the middle of the San Fernando Valley. That is Hollywood magic, turning a cold pond beside a freeway into a tropical paradise that millions of people believed was real. Number 13. The snub in the theme song that caused a stir across the island. Remember the familiar debate, Mary Ann or Ginger? In the first season, CBS seemed to have a rather harsh answer. Neither one. The version of the theme song written by Sherwood Schwartz and George Weil introduced the skipper, the millionaire, and his wife, along with the movie star. But the professor and Mary Ann were grouped together under the phrase, the rest. It was like being invited to a party and then being introduced as some people we happened to find in the parking lot. The song was very catchy, but this introduction did not make the cast very happy. Bob Denver did not accept it either. He pushed CBS to include the professor and Mary Ann in the official introduction. When the studio objected because of the costs, Denver even offered to move his own name to the end of the introduction so he could stand with his two co-stars. CBS did not want the show's main star to lose the top position, so it ultimately decided to revise the whole thing. By season 2, the theme song was re-recorded in a cheerful sea shanty style, and this time, the professor and Mary Ann were finally named. A small change in the song, but it showed that Bob Denver was willing to use his star status to make sure no one in the cast was treated as the rest. Number 14. When Gilligan became a cartoon and Ginger turned blonde. Do you remember the days when Saturday morning cartoons were treasures of children's television? In 1974, Filmation brought the Castaways to the animated screen because apparently being stranded on a tropical island was still not strange enough. The New Adventures of Gilligan brought most of the original cast back to voice-animated versions of themselves with Filmation's signature limited animation style.
I don't know about your career, but we have an excellent opportunity here to make a documentary about this unknown island.
You know, the kind of animation where the characters move as if they are being pulled by invisible strings, and the same walking cycle is reused again and again. Sherwood Schwartz was also deeply involved in the production process. But this is where things get interesting. Tina Louise had no desire at all to return as Ginger. She wanted to distance herself from the character that had made her famous. To avoid legal problems involving the use of Louise's likeness, the animated version of Ginger was turned into a blonde, because nothing says we are absolutely not copying Tina Louise more clearly than changing the hair color. Meanwhile, Dawn Wells was busy with stage work and could not voice Mary Ann, so the producers hired Jane Webb to voice both female characters. Webb was credited under her real name for Ginger, but used her married name, Jane Edwards, for Mary Ann. As a result, the credits made viewers think there were two different actresses, when in reality, one woman was basically talking to herself. The show also added Snubby, a monkey companion for Gilligan, because apparently Saturday morning cartoons always needed a cute animal. In typical Filmation style, Snubby also helped deliver moral lessons at the end of each episode. Because what could be more educational than a cartoon monkey teaching children about sharing?
Snubby, stop! Cut out the monkey business!
To save money on royalties, they also removed the famous sea shanty theme song and replaced it with a poem read by the cast over generic music.
There once was a ship that put to sea, the name of the ship.
Well, everyone except Bob Denver. Apparently, even the animated version of Gilligan had limits when it came to budget-saving compromises. Although it was mainly low-cost content for the Saturday morning time slot, the show was still popular enough to lead to Gilligan's Planet in 1982. This time, the castaways finally escaped the island, only to end up stranded on a planet beyond Earth. Headhunters and strange visitors were now replaced by aliens and actual space creatures. Because once you have used up every way for Gilligan to ruin a rescue plan on Earth, there is always an entire galaxy left. Number 15. How the Skipper became a tough guy in real life. On screen, the Skipper was the steady, sometimes clumsy, but always kind-hearted captain of the Cess Minnow. In real life, Alan Hale Jr. was just as tough. He once hit a broken arm just so production would not have to stop. For Hale, the saying "the show must go on" really seemed to be a way of life.
That's all right, little buddy.
What are we gonna do?
The first thing we must do is remain calm and cool. You won't get hysterical, will you?
Right.
And you won't panic.
Right.
The incident happened during the first season when Hale performed a stunt involving a fall from a palm tree. He landed off the pad and broke his wrist. But instead of telling the crew, Hale decided to keep quiet about it for several weeks. As an old-school professional actor, he continued doing everything as usual. Imagine that. With a broken bone, Hale still wrestled with Gilligan, carried heavy props around the set, and performed physical comedy. He did not complain, did not take a single day off, and kept acting as if nothing had happened.
Well, how do I look, Gilligan?
You look like a bowl of soggy shredded wheat.
Thank you for the compliment.
The truth only came out at the end of season party, when creator Sherwood Schwartz noticed that Hale's wrist was unusually swollen and asked what had happened. Hale casually said that he had broken it several weeks earlier, as if he were just talking about the weather. When Schwartz asked in amazement how he could perform all those comedy scenes with a broken arm, Hale simply replied, "It wasn't easy." Only then did he get a cast from his wrist to his elbow, and this was not even Hale's only accident on the set. In another episode, while performing a fall with a bamboo ladder, a sharp splinter cut his ear and forced him to wear a bandage. Basically, Hale was like a walking workplace safety violation, but no injury slowed him down. The story shows Alan Hale Jr.'s old-school professionalism. He did not just play the Skipper on screen, he seemed to carry that toughness into real life as well. It turns out the Skipper really was as tough as he looked, perhaps even tougher. So, we have just explored 15 strange facts about Gilligan's Island. Of these 20 facts, which one surprised you the most? And is there any detail about Gilligan's Island that you think we missed? Write it in the comments because your most interesting story could appear in the next video. If you love behind-the-scenes secrets from classic television shows, do not forget to hit like, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications. Thank you for watching until the end, and see you in the next video.